Chapter 4 of Zhang Henshui's golden pink family. The east wall of the cave in the house is secretly surprised. People come to celebrate the hometown rites and share the love. The second plan Yanxi had in mind was that she could not go outside, so she had to start planning it at home. I'm afraid it won't be easy for the family to raise funds from the men, but no one will suffer from famine. It would be more appropriate to start from the female relatives. As for the female relatives, the elder sister-in-law, the third sister-in-law, and Aunt Kui can each borrow a few. Maybe you can ask for some money from your mother. Having made up her mind, without thinking about it, she first came to find Aunt Kui, walked into the yard, and deliberately walked harder. I heard Aunt Kui talking alone inside, probably on the phone with someone. Yanxi didn't go in and stood in the yard, listening to what she said. Just listen to Aunt Kui talking to Sabai and saying, "Unfortunately, Nizi lost more than 1,200 foreign coins yesterday. Yiwu once had a good time playing for rounds. Because if you turn around a little, the old man will not agree." Yanxi thought about it. There was no need to speak. She lost more than 1,000 yuan last night and was somewhat unhappy today. Thinking this way, he came to see his third sister-in-law, Wang Yufan. In this row of houses and 3 courtyards, his father's wife and 2 concubines lived. In the 2 courtyards at the back of the row, the eldest brother and his wife lived. There is a hall in the middle, and after passing through the hall, you can see the 3 sisters of Yanxi and the youngest, Jin Pengzhen and his wife, living into courtyards. Yanxi came from Aunt Kui's side, followed the west wall corridor, and turned into the Moon Gate, which is the house of the second eldest brother Jin Hesun. As soon as they entered the door, they saw the second sister-in-law, Cheng Huiqing, walking out with a large stack of small books in her hands. As soon as he saw Yanxi, he stepped forward, grabbed his hand and said, "Old Qi, I'm just looking for you." While saying this, he placed the stack of small books in his hand on the rockery stone. He took out another book and handed it to Yanxi and said, "You can also write something." Yanxi took a look and saw that it was a donation book for Huming Girls' School. Then he said, with a smile, "Second sister-in-law, if you don't take care of your brother for good things, you will come to me for such a thing. I think you should go to your father." Cheng Huiqing sneered and said, "Look for your father. Forget it. Don't look for a nail to hit. Last time I handed over a copy of the Women's Association Charter, but before I even opened my mouth, he frowned and said, 'Who is trying to show off? Save the poor and give it to them to show off.' I didn't dare to say a second sentence, so I quit." As Yanxi spoke, he flipped through the donation book, and some wrote 50 yuan on it, and some wrote $30. The 5th sister, Min, and the 6th sister, Runzi, both wrote 50 yuan. Cheng Huiqing was the only one who wrote 200 yuan. Then he said, with a smile, "Starting from the older one, you should not look to me first, but the eldest brother. Starting from the dearest one, you should not look to me first, but the second brother." Huiqing said, "I was originally going to. I met you, so I came to find you." Yanxi said, "Where is the second brother?" Huiqing said, "He has money and can't use it like this. He wants to spend it in the alley." The second brother, Hesun, chased him out and said, "Didn't I write a donation? I gave you the money, but you threw it on the ground." Huiqing said, "Who wants your 10 yuan? Write it out. When people ask me, it's a waste of money. It would be better if you didn't write it." Yanxi also wanted to write it for 10 yuan. Now when I heard that my second brother was having trouble writing 10 yuan, he laughed and said, "The 2 sisters in front only wrote 50 yuan. I'll just write 30 yuan. Huiqing smiled and said, "Old Qi, you are very good. Be polite." Yanxi smiled. Huiqing said, "I'm not outspoken, but you Jin family, male and female brothers should do it the other way around. That is, the young lady becomes the young master, and the young master becomes the young lady." Hesun smiled and said, "This is what you should say, not Lao Wu." Lao Liu, "Did you donate more money?" Huiqing said, "Their sisters are much more broad-minded than you. Even though the 8th sister is younger, she is better than your brothers." Hesun smiled at Yanxi, said, "Money is really a good thing. It can create air." Yanxi was eager to borrow money and did not want to get involved with them, so he said to Huiqing, "Second sister-in-law, just write this for me. Come on. I don't have any money. I'll bring it later." After that, he walked back. Walking behind, I saw Wang Yufan wearing an apricot cheongsam, with her back to the full-length mirror, but she turned around to look at the shadow behind her. His third brother, Jin Pengzhen, said in the inner room, "It's really troublesome. Tell me to go out at 1 o'clock. By the time it's 2 o'clock, you haven't dressed up yet. Forget it. I won't wait any longer." Yu Fen said, "I'm busy." "What? How can we just leave as soon as possible?" Peng Zhen said, "Why can't we just wait like you?" Yanxi said, when he saw him. The brother and sister-in-law seemed to be quarreling and flirting. They didn't dare to go in, so they coughed outside the door. Yu Fen looked back and said with a smile, "Seventh sister-in-law, come to me when you have time. If you don't go to the Three Treasures Hall for anything, you will definitely have something to do here." Yanxi said with a smile, "Sister-in-law 3's level of listening to the opera has improved more and more. It's just a play." Yu Fen said with a smile, "What the hell? I'll show you a play tomorrow." Yanxi said, "I heard that the wives of the Deng family also organized a colorful society. Are you in?" Yu Fen pouted at the room and waved her hands, said, "I have no contact with them. I learned a few lines of singing from Hua Yuexiang." Yanxi said, "No wonder I said, what does it mean for young ladies and young ladies to praise Kunling? It turns out that they want to be their masters." Yu Fen said, "Who is like?" Peng Zhen then said, "Come on, you don't have to leave, just sit down and talk about the show slowly." Yu Fen said, "I want to talk. I want to talk. Talk. Are you in charge?" Yanxi smiled and left when he saw the couple going out. As soon as Yanxi returned to her room, she muttered to herself, "Unlucky. I planned to borrow money, but someone donated 30 yuan instead. It's impossible to buy a house like this." A person was sitting in the room, feeling stuffy. A few hours later, Jin Rong came back and said, "We have met Wang Desheng again. After talking for a long time, the price was not right." Yanxi said, "I don't necessarily want that dilapidated house, we will rent it. It's just for a few months. But if you don't want to rent the first floor, I want to rent the two connected houses together." Jin Rong said, "There are people living in that house. How can I rent it?" He said, "I'm just renting, and I don't want the tenant to move out, so why not?" Jin Rong thought for a while, understood what Yanxi meant, and said, "Maybe it will work, but Wang Desheng is very cunning. I'm afraid he's going to rip us off." Yanxi said impatiently, "Just let him knock it off. How much can it cost?" "It's only 1,000 yuan a month." Jin Rong said, "Where do you want that?" Said, "This is over. You have 2 days to complete the matter. If you can't do it, I won't listen to you." Jin Rong wanted to speak, but Yanxi said, "Don't say more, just do it like that. You want? If it doesn't work, I'll ask someone else to go." Jin Rong didn't dare to say anything and had to go out. The next day, Jin Rong made an appointment with Wang Desheng to meet at the big wine tank and offered a large price. The asking price was 150 yuans, and we rented to houses. After all, if the money is up to 200 yuans a month, Wang Desheng will be given another 100 yuans for drinks. Wang Desheng was embarrassed for a while and said, "The rent is enough, but we can't rent the Leng family's house. Because when the boss asks, 'Why do you want to rent it?' What should I say?" Jin Rong said, "Just say we do it for convenience." Wang Desheng said, "What's the convenience? One gate faces Quanquan Hutong, and the other gate faces Luohua Hutong. They have different interests. Now you have to rent it from us, and then rent it to him. Isn't it a joke?" Jin Rong thought it was right and said nothing. Wang Desheng suddenly remembered something, smiled, and said to Jin Rong, "I have a way. You don't have to rent that house. I guarantee that your young master will be happy with it." He said this to Jin Rong again. Jin Rong smiled and said, "Great, that's how it is done." Wang Desheng said, "The rent doesn't need to be that much, just 150. But," Jin Rong said, "Of course, promised you, and I will never shrink it. Go back. If you do this, we will save 50 yuan a month and give you 100 yuan in tea money. But our young master is very impatient. The sooner the better." Wang Desheng said, "Our house is here. What's the speed? Just pay the rent and it will be considered a success." Seeing that the matter was done, Jin Rong went back to report. Yanxi heard that he was also satisfied, so he wrote a check for 1,000 yuan and gave it to Jin Rong to clean up the house and buy some property. "Everything must be ready within 3 days, and we will move in on the 4th day." Jin Rong knew his temper and arranged with him day and night. He also hired more than a dozen decorators to decorate the house overnight. The owner of that house was originally an antique businessman who was very good at making money. But now that someone was willing to pay 150 yuans a month to rent this old house, why wouldn't he agree? Wang Shangshang told the nonsense again and again, but he believed it. On the afternoon of the third day, Yanxi took a car and went to see the new house. The king who was guarding the house over there was victorious, and he was also there supervising the masons and tidying up the house. Yanxi looked around and saw that the paper was very bright, cleaned up inside and out again. It's not as messy as before. Wang Desheng looked at Yanxi's elegant and luxurious appearance, and he was a wealthy young man. Then he came forward and bowed his legs to Yanxi, lowered his hands and said goodbye. Jin Rong said on the side, "He is here to look after the house." Yanxi smiled at him, touched in his bag, took out a 10 yuan bill, handed it to him, and said, "I will buy you a pair of shoes." Wang Desheng was overjoyed and sent Yanxi another greeting. He turned back to Jin Rong and smiled and said, "I've already taken care of that matter. Let's watch it all the way." After saying that, he led the way. I just walked through a corridor and heard a splashing sound. Wang Desheng turned around and said with a smile, "Listen, isn't this the sound? Everyone, take a step quickly." When he walked to the backyard, he saw that a short wall to the east had fallen more than half, and the broken bricks were rolling down. Rest. On the other side of the wall is the corner of a courtyard. Then someone shouted from the other side, "Oh, the wall has fallen down." In this voice, two women and a girl came out. A middle-aged woman inside supported the woman and said, "I was shocked." "It's okay. Why did you fall down?" The woman said, "Very good. The rent collector is over there. Please tell him." "Landlord," he said, pointing his hand this way. Wang Desheng nodded early, walked through the gap, and said, "What a coincidence. I'm right here. Let me go back and tell the landlord." The middle-aged woman said, "Has the house next door to you been rented out?" Wang Desheng said with a smile, "It's rented out." The middle-aged woman said, "It's inconvenient for the two families, so we should make up for it as soon as possible." Wang Desheng said, "It's our house. What's the big deal? We live in the same yard together." They were talking here and Yanxi was listening and chatting, looking around at the trees in the yard and peeking at the woman, who was the one she admired, Sun. At this time, she was wearing a set of narrow black trousers with short sleeves that exposed her white arms, a short collar that exposed her white neck, and a pair of narrow black velvet thin-soled shoes on her feet, paired with white stockings. Her jet black hair styled into two smooth buns, and her fair face, black and white, are everywhere, and the harmony of the colors makes her look plainer and cuter. Because Yanxi was standing in the gap in the wall, the woman was very close to her, so she couldn't help but glance at her. He was seen wearing a light blue brocade robe, a printed green satin mandarin jacket with red rhinestone buttons, and a gray velvet basin hat with 3 colored floral silk hoops. I thought, where did such a fashionable young man come from? For a moment, I seemed to have seen this person somewhere, but I just couldn't remember. Yanxi turned around and was about to talk to Wang Desheng when he met Wang Desheng unknowingly. The woman quickly turned around and walked away. Wang Desheng said to Yanxi, "Master Jin, this is Mrs. Leng. She is very kind." Yanxi smiled and cupped hands with Mrs. Leng. Wang Desheng said to Mrs. Leng again, "This is Mr. Qingqiu. He will move here soon. His old master is Prime Minister Jin." Mrs. Leng was surprised when she saw Yanxi dressed so fashionably and heard that he was the son of the Prime Minister. He looked around. Because Wang Desheng introduced him, he smiled at Yanxi. Yanxi said, "We will be neighbors from now on. If there is anything we can't do, we will ask Aunt for advice." Mrs. Leng called her aunt when she saw him opening her mouth. She thought this man was amiable, and said with a smile, "Master Jin, don't be too polite. I don't know anything." Then he said to Wang Desheng, "Please go back and tell the landlord to clean up the wall as soon as possible." Wang Desheng promised, "It won't take much trouble." Mrs. Leng then went back to her room. As soon as she entered the house, her daughter Leng Qingqiu asked, "Mom, do you know the young man over there?" Mrs. Leng said, "How could I know him?" Qingqiu said, "How can you talk to him if you don't know him?" Mrs. Leng said, "It's the man surnamed Wang who collects the room fees. He was busy introducing me. The man called me aunt politely, so how could I ignore him?" According to Mr. Wang, his father is Prime Minister Jin. Qingqiu said, "Look at the way he is dressed. he looks like a young man. I seem to have seen this person somewhere. Mrs. Leng smiled and said, where have you seen him? This is the psychological effect you often talk about. Because you see that he is dressed fashionably, you think he is similar to the fashionable people you see before, so you seem to have seen him before. Qingqiu thought about it and thought that this might be right. After saying that, she threw it away. I had nothing to do in the afternoon, so I chatted with Han Ma at home. Han Ma said, Miss, haven't you been to the house next door? It turns out to be a very big house. Qingqiu said, okay, let's go and take a look. I always see the trees next door when I'm here, and I guess it must be very good over there. But they're moving in, so it's better if we don't run into people there. Han Ma said, it doesn't matter. They're just moving in tomorrow. Qingqiu smiled and said, let's go. If you ask me later, I'll say you wanted to take me there. Han Ma smiled and said, yes, it's not like we're 10 miles away. Who could have snatched us away? As they said that, the two of them walked through the gap in the wall and came over here. Qingqiu looked at these houses and saw that they were busy painting inside and out. The tender leaves of the trees in the yard were growing green. Under the shade of the trees, many new rose, peony, and peony bonsai were placed, and it felt very lively. To the north, under the wisteria trellis, there was a row of 3 large houses, which were decorated particularly gorgeously. The window sashes outside were all painted with red lacquer, and the oil had not yet dried. The glass windows were all painted with snow-cut gauze. Qingqiu said, it's not worth it to tidy up this old house, which is so big. If you had the money to tidy it up, wouldn't you rent a new house? Han Ma said, that's right. Maybe there are other reasons. As she said that, she pushed the door open and saw that the walls were covered with foreign lacquered printed paper, which was bright and shiny. Qingqiu said, this is even more expensive. The reception room in our school is covered with this kind of paper. I heard that it costs dozens of yuan for one room. This room is probably where their master lives. Han Ma said, I heard that there is only a young master living here, and there is no young mistress. Qingqiu said, why would a young master rent such a big house? Han Ma said, who knows? They all say so. As the two were talking, they saw exquisite wooden furniture and antiques being carried in. Among them was a rosewood screen, with a white silk, embroidered with a peacock spreading its tail, which looked like a living thing. Qingqiu saw it and said to Han Ma, this screen is the best Hunan embroidery, and it's probably worth 100 or 200 yuan. Han Ma heard this and came over to take a closer look. Someone said, someone is watching over there, so don't move. Qingqiu looked back and saw that it was the young man in fancy clothes that he saw yesterday, now wearing a suit and standing on the side of the wisteria trellis. Qingqiu blushed with shame and pulled Han Ma, whispering, someone is coming, hurry up, hurry up. Han Ma was also panicked and couldn't tell east from west, south from north. She walked out of a corridor and saw a mess of wooden objects. It didn't look like the way she came, so she went back. The young man said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We are all neighbors. That's the main gate. I'll lead you back this way. As he said that, he led the way. When they reached the gap in the wall, he said again, slow down, don't rush, be careful not to fall. Han Ma said, excuse me. Qingqiu said nothing, holding Han Ma's hand, and just walked forward. When they got home, her heart was still beating wildly. She complained to Han Ma, you said you wanted to go over and have fun, but now you meet someone else, it's embarrassing. Han Ma said, we are neighbors, it's okay to look at the house. Mrs. Leng saw them talking, and came over to ask, what are you talking about? Qingqiu didn't dare to hide it, so she repeated what she had just said when she went to the next door. Mrs. Leng said, it's okay to go and have a look. But the wall collapsed, which is very inconvenient for us. We should ask the landlord to repair it earlier. Besides, I heard that this young Master Jin just organized a poetry club here, and didn't bring his family to live here, which is particularly inconvenient. Qingqiu said, who did you hear that from? Mrs. Leng said, it was your uncle who said that, and your uncle heard it from the person who collected the rent. Before she finished speaking, Han Ma's husband, Han Guangji, came in with 2 big red boxes and opened the lids of the big red boxes. On one side were steamed red and white osmanthus cakes and fried dough sticks, and on the other side were a few bottles of wine and snacks from the southern goods store. Mrs. Leng said, where did these things come from? Han Guangji said, the clerk next door sent them here. He said that their young master said that they are all from the south. These are some things sent here according to the southern customs. Please don't return them. Mrs. Leng said, yes, there is this custom in our hometown. When you move to a certain place, you have to send some things to your neighbors. The idea is to sweeten their mouths and get along well with them in the future. But such gifts are always a plate of cakes, a plate of snacks, or a few rice dumplings. How can you send these things? As he was talking, Leng Qingqiu's uncle Song Runking came in from outside and asked where the gift came from. Han Guangji told him and picked up a business card from the box to show him. Song Runking couldn't help but exclaimed, it's him. Everyone was puzzled after hearing this. Mrs. Leng said, second brother, do you recognize this man? Song Runking said, I'm glad that I recognize him. Mrs. Leng said, why are you surprised after seeing this business card? Song Runking said, I first heard from Wang Desheng that the person living next door is the son of Prime Minister Jin, but I didn't believe it. Now, this business card says Jin Hua, and his name is Yanxi, which just fits the Jin family's bird generation name. Who else could it be but Prime Minister Jin's son? They took the business card and gave us these things. It's a great honor. What should we do? Mrs. Leng said, according to our southern customs, we have to accept these things. If we don't accept them, it means we look down on them and don't want to be neighbors with them. Song Runking said, then how can we do that? Such a family is not worthy of being our neighbors. What kind of family is worthy of being our neighbors? Accept it. Accept it. We have nothing else to give back, so we will go to thank him in person tomorrow. Mrs. Leng said, that's not necessary. Song Runking didn't wait for Mrs. Leng to finish, and said, sister, you are in charge of the household affairs, and I admire you for these things. When it comes to the ways of the world and socializing outside, I am confident that I have some experience. He gave us gifts with his status as the Prime Minister's son, and we accepted them for nothing, without even saying thank you. What kind of words are these? He immediately fumbled around on his body for a while, took out a business card and gave it to Han Guangji, saying, you go and tell the person who sent the gifts that the uncle will come to visit in person tomorrow, and now he is thanking me with the business card. He also said to Mrs. Leng, you should give them more money to do the work. Seeing Song Runking say this, Mrs. Leng accepted the gift as he said. The next day, Song Runking put on his clothes and hat and came to thank Yanxi. Because it was his first visit, he didn't want to come through the hole in the wall, but took a big detour and deliberately walked through the alley to the gate and asked the doorman to go in and report. When Yanxi saw that it was Song Runking's business card, he remembered that Jin Rong, who had delivered something yesterday, said that this was his uncle, and immediately invited him to the living room to meet him. Song Runking took off his hat outside the door and held it in his hand, bowing all the way in. Yanxi saw that he was about 50 years old, with a small mustache, a thunder god face, and a pair of small glasses as big as copper coins, just like a small clown on the stage. Although the clothes he was wearing were also made of silk, they were all old goods from 7 or 8 years ago, and the sleeves of the shirt were tied around his body like pen holders. He thought, how could such a pretty girl have such an uncle? Even Mrs. Leng was a very gentle woman. How could she have such a brother? But for the sake of love, she was definitely not willing to be cold to him. He said, please sit down, please sit down. I haven't come to visit you yet, but you have to come here first. I don't deserve it. Song Runking said, I heard that Mr. Jin moved in here, and I was very happy, so I planned to come here to visit him first. I am really sorry that Mr. Jin took so much trouble yesterday. Yanxi smiled and said, it's nothing. We are all from the south, and this is according to the southern rules. Where is your government, Mr. Song? Song Runking bowed, frowned, and said, it's ridiculous. It's a small and poor government, a drug prohibition office. Yanxi said, where is your relative? Song Runking said, my relative is a widow, and my sister's husband passed away 3 years ago. Yanxi said, Mr. Song also lives here. Song Runking said, yes. Because there are few people in their family, I live here to take care of the family. Yanxi smiled and said, since we are neighbors, I hope you can give me more advice in the future. Song Runking hurriedly bowed and said, I don't deserve it. I heard that Mr. Jin moved out of the mansion and wanted to organize a poetry club here with a few friends. Is it true? Yanxi smiled and said, that's the intention. But I can't write poetry, but I will be the host and follow. My friend is just learning to write poetry. Song Runking said, speaking of poetry, my elder brother is an expert, and I can write a few lines. Tomorrow Mr. Jin's poetry club will be successful, and I must come to see it. Yanxi was very touched when he heard that he could write poetry, so he said, great. If you don't mind, I will ask for your advice. Song Runking said, Mr. Jin is making fun of you. A family like yours that has been reading poetry for generations. How can you not write poetry? Yanxi said seriously, it's true. Because I can't write poetry, I want to organize a poetry club. Song Runking said, although I can't write poetry, I can't write poetry. What do you know? The eldest brother left the most books and poetry collections, all of which are here with my relatives. Since we are so close, we can often study together. Yanxi said, great, Mr. Song is at home every day. After the arrangements are completed, you can go there every day to learn from him. Song Runking said, my place is very narrow, and there is no place to sit. It is better for you to come over from time to time to learn from him. Yanxi smiled and said, we are separated by a wall, so we can come and go freely. Song Runking did not expect that he would have such a chance to make a permanent friendship on his first meeting, and he was very happy. He also talked happily for 2 hours and went home happily. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.